Hey Jazz Theory students, now that we've talked about a couple different chord types, let's go ahead and put these into context. Today's main topic is chord progressions. So we're going to review, of course, diatonic, seventh chords, put them in a context of some common chord progressions, and then also look at the guide tones and how to actually voice lead between chords. So let's go ahead and get things started. There we go. All right, so the diatonic seventh chords, we're just going to begin in C major on major scale harmony first because that's a great, easy place to start. Our diatonic seventh chords, diatonic of course means pertaining to a major scale, but what we're going to be doing is building seventh chords, and note the sort of like order and what chords happen in what sequence. So the very first one, our C major scale of course, we're just going to grab every diatonic seventh chord coming straight out of that. So the very first one, of course, C major scale. We get a C major 7 chord. That's the 1 function, or in this case, in the key of C, that would be our tonic function. 1 is major. Going up to the next one. Every note from D, F, A, C creates a minor 7th, and this is something that you got to keep aware, even though it's major scale harmony. The first chord is major, but there are other kind of chords, minor, that's going to pop up from then on forward. If we go up from E, we get E, G, B, D, which gives us the third chord, or the third in the diatonic sequence, which is going to be minor 7. So far we got major 7, minor 7 for 2 function, minor 7 for the 3 function. For the 4 function, it's going to be a major chord again, major 7. The 5. This is an important one. The 5 is a dominant, 1, 3, 5. And when I say lowered 7th, we're referring, of course, in relation to the root of G. But even though we're in the key of C, that G7, all the notes in there come from C major, as you can see, all the white notes. So that G7 chord is that dominant chord is our 5 function. That's probably the most important chord of them all. Moving onwards, the 6th function is minor. And finally, the 7, starting from B, D, F, A, gives us a half diminished or a minor 7 flat 5. So let's go over those quickly one more time. Major 7, minor 7, minor 7, major 7, 5 dominant 7, 6 minor 7, and then 7 is the half diminished. So we got major, minor, minor, major, dominant, minor, half diminished. And you want to kind of commit that major, minor, minor, major, dominant, minor, half diminished sequence to memory, because when you're learning new chord progressions, it really helps to sort of see where all these different chords in a tune, they oftentimes all come from a single key. So you don't have to think of, when you're improvising, for example, you might have 10 different chords, but if they all belong to a single key, you don't have to think about every single chord if you improvise in that key. Kind of like over all of these. I could still play a C major scale over all of those because they're all diatonic, belonging to the family of C major diatonic 7th chords. So let's begin with the most common chord progression, the 2-5-1, and I'm going to do this in root position right now, so it's easy. So if we're in the key of C, 1, these are our roots, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we think of them 1 major 7, 2 minor 7, 3 minor 7, 4 major 7, 5 dominant 7, 6 minor 7, 7 half diminished. So our 2-5-1 progression, we're going to use those roots. D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is G, our dominant chord, leading back to our 1 in this key, which is C. So that would give us this 2-5-1 progression. This is the most common progression in all jazz tunes. Now, not the greatest voicing in the world. We'll kind of get to that as we get into guide tones and voice leading. However, just kind of like hearing it and sing it. 2, 5, 1. And I think it helps a lot to kind of internalize that bass. 2, 5, 1. and sing it out and play it on your instrument when you're playing through tunes. Just playing the root motion of a tune can be actually really, really helpful. So that's the 2-5-1 progression. Let me voice it in a way that sounds a little bit more human, or like how people would actually play it. And you notice I added a couple extensions there, and then I also inverted our voices a little bit. So let's talk about voice leading and the guide tones. So the guide tones of this 2-5-1 progression in the bass, or I should say in the left hand here. Let me make this a little bit more obvious. In the left hand, I'm going to play just the roots D, G, C, 2-5-1, and C. And in the right hand, this is a good way to like start, working on piano too, or whatever instrument you play, even if you're a melodic player, to play through the intervals. The most important parts of any chord are the third and the seventh. Those are called the guide tones. Extremely important for finding your way through chords that are smooth, and also if you just want to sound like you're playing the changes. So on D minor 7, I'm just going to grab the third and the seventh. So I'm going to take the root out of my voicing here, keep it in the bass. I'm going to take the fifth out, and that leaves me with the root and the bass, and my voicing consists of the third and the seventh of my 2 D minor 7 chord in the key of C major. Now when I go to G7, G7 are these notes. And this is in root position again. However, we're looking for just the third and seventh, so I'm going to take G out, I'm going to take the fifth D out, and that gives me a B and an F. So let's notice between D minor and G7, we still get the sound of that overall progression, kind of like in its basic form, third and seventh, and third and seventh. Now if you notice, there's an F in this chord, that third, and an F in this chord, that seventh. So the guide tones, what we want to do is voice lead them, which means not clunkily move around like this. That's a lot more work just to kind of like do on piano than you really need to, because there's an F in common, so we can keep that F, the third, and just reuse it for our G minor 7th instead of playing F way up there like we were a second ago. So that would give us, and when we go to C major, I'm looking for a C, E, G, B. I'm going to take the root and fifth out. I'm looking for that E. That F will go. And that's a guide tone line. Again, guide tones are just the thirds and sevenths as they smoothly go through the chord changes. On a 2-5-1, they move very little. In fact, it stays in the same spot. And you want to be efficient. And I have to pick an E or a B here, moving to my next one. Well, E is right next to F. And that's how we create a guide tone line. So for review on 2-5-1, that F is going to stay F when we go to the G7 chord. The C up here, we're going to G7 next, so that's going to have to move down a half step to reach the B to get the entire sound of that basic guide tone voicing for G7. And then when we go to C major, my F is going to come down to E. My B, on the other hand, is the major seventh of C major. So again, watch how little the notes move on the keyboard or on the staff as we go through it. And for you pianists and guitar players who don't have to play the roots because you have a bass player in your group, just notice how little the actual motion moves the voicing without the roots in context. Sounds kind of strange without that context, but putting it back in, here's your bass player, here's your left hand, for example. Or let's say you're a melodic player and you want to improvise your way through a solo. A good way to do that is to just start off using the guide tones, and one noting it, that kind of thing is a good plan of action just to kind of get started. guys could hear, that was my guide tone line to get through there. I dressed it up a little bit. I'll be more specific this time. And that would be a great, sort of beginning guide tone line. And really what you end up doing when you're improvising melodically is you just kind of like dress that up in certain ways. And in this case, I'm just using the other arpeggiated tones of that same chord, or I should say each passing chord, to kind of navigate my way around. But you can hear that same guide tone line is the sort of basis right there. So we've covered our diatonic majors: major, dominant, minor, half diminished. Pulled out the 2-5-1. And then also talked about guide tones as they sort of pass through in a very efficient way in terms of making voicings or using it melodically speaking. Just our guide tone line again. All right, so that covers it for our diatonic progression and 2-5-1s. It's important to note that, whatever key you're in this case we're just in C. Again, we're in C major, but you can have the first chord, the 2 chord, is always a minor chord, so don't let that kind of throw you off. But whatever key you're in, if you're building 2-5-1s, in the key of F, whoa, let's try that again. Or maybe in the key of E flat, the same concepts apply. So let me do that one more time just with guide tones, and you'll hear, even though I don't have like full voicings, the guide tone voicings kind of fill that sound of the chord, and you can hear the key changes very clearly. Now let's go to the key of A flat. Now let's go to the key of something unrelated. How about E? Yeah, that works. 2 would be F sharp, 5 would be B7, 1 would be E major. All right, that covers it for our diatonic majors and 2-5-1s. Stop. Here we are.